Okie dokie, here we go. World War II. So World War II's got a lot of stuff. The study guide that you're going to have for this unit is pretty intense. It's 3 pages long. It's got a lot of terms. It's got a lot of people. It's got a lot of locations you have to know. There's going to be a map aspect to this one. There's going to be amendments back because, amendments are amazing things. There's some numbers you need to know. There is just a whole lot that you're going to need to know in this unit. So let's get to it. This is basically a breakdown of the study guide that you got on this week, probably on Wednesday. And it's big, so let's go through it. The first part is terms. And I'm going to go through all these in class, but this is a quick snapshot of these terms, and it's going to give you an idea of what to know for each one of them. Blitzkrieg. This was how the Germans would come in and they would do basically a 3-prong attack when they would go after people. They would weaken the whatever place they're attacking. They would weaken it by aerial assault, and then they would bring in the tanks and then the ground troops. Basically, it was a 3-punch response to any person they're trying to attack. Aerial assault, tanks, and then people on the ground. And they also had this thing where they would encircle their enemies basically with these 2 pincer movement, and then they would destroy their enemies that way. But basically, Blitzkrieg is a 3-prong attack that the Germans used. Airplanes, tanks, and then foot soldiers. Hubris is a term that, man, if Hitler knew this, he might not have lost at least World War II the way he lost it. So hubris is thinking you know better, that you're smarter than others, that you give yourself too much credit when you should be more humble. Humbleness is like the opposite of hubris. And when he goes and attacks Stalin, really at the same time that the United States is getting involved in the war, really within like the same month that the United States joins World War II, he decides to attack Stalin in that time range. That's just hubris. That's you thinking you have more power than you do, and that's eventually going to lead to his demise. Luftwaffe. The Luftwaffe was the air force of the Germans, of Nazi Germany. They were extremely good at what they were doing. The RAF was the other side of the coin. That's the UK's air force. But the Luftwaffe is the German air force. Battle of Stalingrad is one of the dumb things Hitler did, and I can say it's dumb because he had some dumb moves. People think he's a great military commander, and no, he really wasn't. He went after Stalingrad, and I know joke, one of the reasons why is he thought it would actually impact Stalin the most because it had his name. Yeah, he attacked a city on one of the basis of it had the same name as the person that he didn't like, and that's going to really affect him emotionally. This is basically a death trap. This is Germans marching to their death. This is also Russians dying in droves. This is a lot of people dying in Stalingrad. It's cold, but they hold off the Germans. Operation Fortitude, one of my favorite operations in the entire history of military and U.S. military history. We basically, Operation Fortitude, we have these balloon tanks that we put to distract Hitler from the D-Day invasion. We put Patton up there, a really well-known general, which we'll talk about later. And we put these up here to distract, ooh, look it up here. And Germany, they fell for it. Oh, look it, they have tanks up there. They were balloon tanks and all these props. Like the Hollywood came in and basically made a fake base with all this stuff. And they're like, oh, that's where the attack's going to come. Nope. It was a bunch of miles south of there. So Operation Fortitude was basically psyching out the Germans, which was an amazing feat on our part. D-Day. D-Day is the day that we land in Normandy. This is the if you ever watched Saving Private Ryan, this is us getting our boots on the ground in Europe. And when I say us, I mean the United States. So now D-Day's big significance is Germany has to fight a 2-sided war, and you never want to do that. That's just bad news bears for you. Battle of the Bulge takes place after D-Day, and it sounds like what it is. There's this bulge in the line. There's a fight on both sides. And really, this is the last chance that Germany has to mount a defensive that's going to last, and it doesn't last. VE Day is basically the end of the war in Europe. This is where Germany calls it quits, and that's pretty much the end of the war. Now we have to turn our attention to the Pacific, which is going to be Japanese. Speaking of that, Battle of Midway is a huge battle in the Pacific that takes place. We sink a ridiculous number of Japanese ships in this battle. We're going to watch a video of it in class, actually, or at least it's a reenactment of it. Kamikaze attacks is the Japanese planes. This is towards the end of the war. This is when they're running out of fuel and ammunition in their planes, and they're using their own planes as weapons, and they will just commit suicide and drive their planes into our ships and take out as many Americans as they can by killing themselves. Hiroshima is a place where we dropped the atomic bomb, and Nagasaki is also a place we dropped the atomic bomb. It was Little Boy and Fat Man that we dropped. These are the only civilian places in warfare that bombs were ever dropped. And we're going to talk about this more in depth when we get to the test time, but that's really the first two places we ever dropped bombs. Anybody's ever dropped bombs on civilian sites. And yes, there were military targets, but generally speaking, there was more civilians than military targets in these areas. Nuremberg trials. These change how we look at warfare as a world. We establish kind of rules to the road, if you will, of warfare. You can't basically say I was ordered to do this and get away with it scot-free, because it's just not how it works anymore. The Nuremberg trial says that there is certain morality we have to follow in warfare, and you are beholden to them regardless of who gives you those orders. This really is putting the spotlight on Holocaust and all those death camps, which we'll talk about later. We got Ethiopia. The reason why it's a term is this is one of the first places that Mussolini attacks from Italy. You have Ethiopia, this place in Africa that he believed was his, and he should have gotten this from World War I, or his country should have gotten this from World War I and didn't. So there's that. Siberia is this cold, barren wasteland that's just death and destruction for Russia. Basically, if you're sent to Siberia, you're sent there to die. These are labor camp types of things. The train ride there alone is almost a death trap. So Siberia is basically the place that the Russians would send people to die. Let's get to people. And I didn't miss a couple terms on purpose. I want you to go hunt those on your own, like Lend-Lease and some other things. So you can hunt those guys on your own, or just pay attention to class. FDR is the first person I'm talking about. Things I remember about him: fireside chats, polio. Remember, he was the one that got us. I shouldn't say he got us out of the Great Depression, but he was the president during the time that we were trying to get out of the Great Depression. Presidents don't have that type of power to get entire countries out of the Great Depression. It takes more than one person. Come on, let's not be lazy. It's Congress, it's the average person, it's a whole bunch of things. Fireside chats is a big thing. That's where he was basically boosting the morale of Americans, saying we can do this, and he would basically use the radio as a way to get people, to buy in. Polio was a disease that basically made it so he couldn't use his legs for the rest of his life, and yeah. Pretty much what I would say there. He's not going to be president throughout the whole thing. He's going to die in the middle of World War II, actually towards the end of World War II, and we're going to get a new President Truman. So we'll talk about him in a minute. Churchill, and one of the things you need to know about each one of these people, know what country they're from. Churchill's from the United Kingdom. He's from England, and he takes over because there's this guy named Chamberlain who's basically not being forceful against Hitler at the time, and Hitler keeps taking more. If you give a mouse a cookie, he's going to want a glass of milk, and that's what's happening with Hitler and Chamberlain. Chamberlain gives him a glass of, or a cookie. Hitler wants a glass of milk, and then it just keeps going down that line. Or in this case, the Rhineland, the Sudetenland, those type of things. So eventually, Churchill takes over, and he's the one that really leads the United Kingdom in the fight towards, the Axis powers. Also, England is the one that takes the biggest brunt, other than Stalin. Stalin takes the biggest brunt, I should say, and UK is next when it comes to at least aerial attacks. Speaking of Stalin, he's in Russia, and he is a dictator through and through, and he actually murders more people than Hitler does. But we used a monster to kill a monster in this type of scenario. And things you need to know about Stalin: he did these things called purges, where he killed several people in his country through starvation or just execution. He also sent a bunch of political prisoners to Siberia to die. He, not a pleasant person, but again, used a monster to kill a monster. Let's go to Hitler from Germany. Things to know about Hitler's Germany: the reason why people loved him is because there's this thing called hyperinflation. And hyperinflation is when your money becomes meaningless, where you have to actually have like stacks of money, like this much money just to buy a loaf of bread. And when your country is suffering that much and you have somebody that comes by and promises you that they can get you out of there and they start getting you out of that depression, people start doing things like follow them. So they start following him. The Night of Long Knives is something to remember about with him. He basically, this is a night that he goes and has a bunch of his men kill political opponents at night, like just straight up go into their houses and shoot them type of thing. He's also responsible for the architecture of the Holocaust, him and a few others, which we'll talk about in class. But yeah, Hitler, he'll eventually kill himself in his bunker as the Russians get nearer. Mussolini, he's from Italy. We knew him from World War I, so he's like, the World War I guy. And he's the one that was a sniper in World War I. He eventually takes over because he uses the radio. He's kind of like a radio host type person, and he gets Italians to be like, yeah, we need to be more powerful. And he starts organizing a group called the Black Shirts. Now, Hitler organizes a group called the Brown Shirts. So remember that with Hitler. Brown Shirts, Hitler. Black Shirts, Mussolini. And eventually Mussolini takes over Ethiopia. It's one of his first moves. And when he joins Germany and Japan, they become the Axis powers. And he's actually one of the first ones to get out of the war, just like World War I. They're in the war. They're out of the war. Just how it goes. And when he gets out of the war, it's not in a good way. They basically take him throughout the streets and kill him in a horrible, brutal fashion. This is one of the reasons why Hitler took his own life. He did not want to die the way Mussolini died. And the Russians probably would have killed him even worse, if that's even possible. The next group of people is Tojo. And I'm going to jump down to J, which is Hirohito. These are Japanese leaders. Tojo's really the main leader. He's like the military leader, and he really is commanding the majority of the war. His decisions to attack Pearl Harbor really impacts the war in dramatic ways because he gets us involved. Tojo is the military leader of Japan, and Hirohito is the emperor, and he's more of a respected, godlike figure in the eyes of the Japanese people at the time. As far as his military decisions that he makes, really a lot of the decisions go through Tojo. Although Hirohito has more power, when it comes to military, it's Tojo all the way. Patton and MacArthur. Patton's the guy that was distracting Hitler during Operation Fortitude. And then he's also the guy that slapped a soldier who was going through PTSD. Because back then PTSD wasn't a thing. Like it was an actual, yes, it was a thing, but it was something that people didn't accept or acknowledge. So when the soldier was basically like, I'm done, man, I saw too much. Patton looks at this guy, he's like, you look healthy. The guy's like, I'm not. And Patton slaps him across the face. And this is why he doesn't get a demotion, but he kind of gets put on the back shelf for a while. And then they put him up next to Operation Fortitude because Hitler thinks Patton's like this a great general, which he kind of was, also misguided in some ways. And so Germany's like, oh, that's where the attack's coming from the balloon tanks. But that's Patton. MacArthur, we're going to talk about him in the Pacific. So MacArthur is a general in the Pacific. He's going to fight in the Philippines. And we'll talk a little bit more in the class. Truman is the president that takes over after FDR dies. He's the one that is going to say, yeah, we're going to drop the bomb. And he's the one that drops the bomb. And we'll talk more about him, but know that he's the one that he's kind of the leader towards the end of the war for the United States, and he's the one that orders the bomb to be dropped. We're going to get to amendments and some other things next. If it doesn't work, I apologize. So amendments. You know all these amendments. 1, freedom of speech, petition, assembly, religion. Know them, live them, love them. Remember, freedom is the key word for number 1. 2 is guns. Owning guns, right to bear arms, write guns down. Guns. 11, federal courts. It's about court power, really, and like the hierarchy of the courts. Just remember federal courts, and you'll be just fine. 12, you don't vote for one person, you vote for 2 people for president. That's why it's vice president, president, same ticket. 13, free the slaves. 14, born here equals rights. 15, all men can vote. 16, income tax. 17, vote for senators. 18, no more alcohol. 19, women can vote. 20, lame duck quackity quack. 21, yes, alcohol. We get alcohol back. 22, it's new. 22, 2 terms for the president. So they get to only go for 2 terms. 23, DC gets to vote. 23, DC. 24, no poll tax. You don't have to pay a tax to actually go into to vote. 25, the president is too sick, unable to do his job. The vice president takes over. 26, this is where you can vote at 18. And 27, by far the most important one, Congress gets to vote for their own pay raises. Yeah. Numbers you need to know. Allies. The number one ally that lost the most troops would be Russia. Just remember my Lego towers. Russia was ridiculously big. You have, for the Axis, it's Germany that lost the most troops. For who murdered the most people between Hitler and Stalin, it's Stalin. Like, he's in the 30 to 40 million range of people he murdered. Like, not killed in action, murdered. And then we got who had the most logistical advantage of this war. It was the Allies, mostly because the U.S. was the boss when it became to producing stuff. Let's go to countries. You need to know a bunch of countries in Europe. This is going to be a map portion of your test, so you need to know where England is, you're going to need to know where France is, you're going to need to know where Poland is, Czechoslovakia, Austria-Hungary, Italy, Germany, Russia, Switzerland. You're going to need to know them, As far as allies go, there's basically 4 allies I want you to remember. There's more people that helped out in World War II. But these are the 4 allies I want you to remember. You have the United States, you have Russia, you have England, and you have France. Now, France gets knocked out early, but still remember them as part of the allies. As far as the Axis goes, you have Germany, you have Italy, and you have Japan. Know it, live it, love it, peace.